Hey, we ready to go yet?
It's just going live. Okay, it's on live. Okay. So, this means, got it. Okay. Let's see, I think most of our folks are here. Chat. Welcome, everybody, to tonight's program. This is the Ethel Crawford Public Library, and I'm Mary Paige Lane-Klaus, the director. So welcome to tonight's program with Evan Weiner, presenting on Pioneer Women of American TV. I'll just tell you a little bit about Evan. It's hard to tell you a little bit because he's done so much, but I'm going to cover it as best I can. So he is a speaker and author, and he also has a radio and TV background. He has about 25 topics, and he has spoken globally. In 2017, the Department of State sent him to talk to foreign nationals at the George Bush Presidential Library in College Station, Texas, to speak about the politics of sports business in America. He started his journalism career at the age of 15 by hosting a Spring Valley High School talk show on WRKL Radio, Mount Ivy, New York, in 1971. He also at the same time was a correspondent covering high school sports for the Rockland Journal-News in Nyack, New York at the same time. By 1978, he was covering news from WGRC Radio and won 2 Associated Press Awards in 1978 and 1979. In the 1980s, he started his long association with Westwood One Radio. He was a contributing columnist for New York Newsday, AM New York, the New York Press, the Bergen, New Jersey Record, the Philadelphia Metro, Washington Examiner, Orlando Sentinel, Rhode Island Sports Journal, and for the Chicago Tribune Spanish Hoy newspapers in New York, Chicago, and LA between and LA. He did daily commentary on radios, and he's appeared on programs on the former WBIS, Channel 31, New York, RNN New York, the History Channel with Al Michaels and Frank DeFord, as well as ABC News Now's Politics Live TV show with Sam Donaldson, CN8 sports program, and the BBC commentary, radio commentary, sports and sponsorship, and MSNBC TV. He's written 12 books, from Peach Baskets to Dance Halls, and the Not So Stern NBA, America's Passion, How a Coal Miner's Game Began the NFL in the 20th Century, The Business and Politics of Sports in 2005, The Business and Politics of Sports, a second edition in 2010, and a 2014 edition. He's written several books about the business and politics of sports, and has really vast experience. So I'm just very happy to welcome him tonight to share this program during Women's History Month. So Evan, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Mary, and thank you to the library for inviting me tonight. My name is Evan Weiner, and this talk actually came out of another talk that I do about Lucille Ball, and came out of another talk that I do about the early days of TV. In fact, the Lucy talk was an assignment by the Chester, New Jersey Library. The woman who runs the library there, Donella, said, August 6th is Lucille Ball's birthday. I have an opening on August 5th, and I got you penciled in to do Lucy. And I said, I don't have anything. She said, you will. And I did. And looking at the early days of TV, Lucy, which I'll talk about Lucy in a couple minutes, she was a pioneer. But there were people who came before her, actually, on television, like Gertrude Berg, who was a powerhouse. And you look back at Gertrude Berg's life, and you look at how she started and where she was in radio in 1929, and you realize that very few men equaled what she did on radio and on TV. And of course, there are others, such as Betty White, who had the longest career of anybody, Mary Kay Stearns, who nobody knows about. But there's a baby in that picture, and that's part of her story. Arlene Francis, who you probably know from What's My Line, among other things. Hazel Scott. Hazel Scott was the first person of color to ever host a television show in the United States on the Dumont Network. Dagmar Dagmar was famous before Marilyn Monroe, and she had two assets. The Bueller Show, there were actually three Buellers, one of them being Ethel Waters, another being Hattie McDaniel, and of course Lucy. Dinah Shore, See the USA, Drive a Chevrolet, and Donna Reed, a show that I didn't particularly like all that much. And then I looked into Donna Reed's background, and Donna Reed did what Gertrude Berg did and did kind of what Lucy did. In fact, Lucy didn't even do what Donna Reed did during her show. Erna Phillips, she started her career in 1933. She still has a show running daily on NBC today, 89 years later. Hey, there's Faye Emerson. She had a late night talk show back in the day. Martha Roundtree was the inventor of the longest running, still is the longest running television show in the United States. Pauline Frederick was a trailblazing woman news reporter. So we go to Chicago, and that's Fran Allison, Kukler, Fran, and Ollie. And this is the days that precede actually any kind of organization. There was a television station set up across the street from the Chicago Theater back in the late 1930s. It was an experimental television station, W9XBK. It was run by a guy by the name of Bill Eddy. And Bill Eddy and the people, you can't say that they were really working at the radio station because there was no money, rather TV station, there was no money coming in. It was experimental. But anyway, across the street's the Chicago Theater. And they would go over to the Chicago Theater, and the actors who were there, they'd say, hey, listen, we're trying to do something with TV. How'd you like to spend a few minutes with us? We have no schedules. We have no announcements. We'll just throw you on TV. Burt Tillstrom was the first face to be seen over W9XBK. Burt Tillstrom's show, Kukler, Fran, and Ollie, would become one of the station's first regularly scheduled shows, and eventually it would be seen across the United States. Now, Mary Kay and Johnny precede all of the situation comedies that were on TV afterwards. They had a show called The Mary Kay and Johnny Show. And this was on the Dumont Network. Now, Dumont was a great manufacturer of televisions. They had no idea how to run a television network. In fact, they didn't even know how to apply for licenses, which in the end would actually be their downfall. But they produced TVs, and like David Sarnoff back in 1921, when the radiola was coming out with RCA, he said, nobody's going to buy this unless we have programming. And Dumont said the same thing. Anyway, that's Mary Kay Stearns, and that's Johnny. In 1947, there's that show, Mary Kay and Johnny, which virtually nobody saw because Dumont was virtually nowhere. But the show had many firsts. Mary Kay Stearns was the first pregnant woman on television. And the producers and writers of the show incorporated the pregnancy into the programming during 1948. And we'll come back in a couple of years in another form. It was also the first show to feature a couple sharing a bed. Maybe it was because of the code in the movies that television decided we're going to be very conservative. We're not going to show a married couple and sharing a bed. But they did. Kind of funny about that in the 1950s. If characters were married on TV or even married in real life, if they sat on a bed, you had to have 1 foot on the floor and 1 foot on the bed. Why? I have no idea. Well, the show would bounce around from Dumont to NBC to CBS. It would end in 1950, but it was groundbreaking because Mary Kay Stearns was pregnant. Arlene Francis hosts a game show. There is Arlene Francis with Moss Hart, who is married to Kitty Carlisle for a while. And it looks like this may be an early version of Card Sharks or High Rollers. She's holding the big card over there, but she wasn't. On May 5th, 1949, Arlene Francis becomes the first woman to host a game show on television. The show was called Blind Date, which precedes the dating game by 2 decades, right? It was originally started as a matchmaking radio show. Maybe they went to the Lower East Side of Manhattan and looked for a Mrs. Fields. Sounds like something that she would have done. Anyway, that show would last 3 years. Arlene would come back. In fact, she was a panelist on What's My Line, which started back in 1950. And she would be part of something called THT, which was NBC. The Today Show, Home Show, and The Tonight Show all came up, all were created by Pat Weaver, Sigourney Weaver's father, Sylvester Weaver. Anyway, the Home Show was not aimed at a mass audience. It was aimed at a very specifically targeted audience, women who had rich husbands or husbands who made a lot of money, women who read magazines like Better Homes and Garden or Ladies' Home Journal, and that's who they wanted. They did not want a mass audience of this thing because they wanted the advertisers in those magazines. Home was an American daytime television program. Intended for an audience of women, debuts in 1954, part of NBC's three major non-primetime shows, Today, Home, and Tonight. The executive was Pat Weaver, and he begins this concept of a show that he wants to do called Shopping in late 1951. It's like I said, it's targeted for a specific audience, upper middle class women. And the content a segmented format inspired by the success of the magazines and local cooking shows that were on TV. Man, remember what was on TV in those days? Wrestling, bowling, cooking shows. They threw everything on in the early days of TV. And also the success of the Today Show. So they wanted this particular demographic. They didn't want just women who were out there scrubbing floors. They wanted a higher income family. But the show failed to get any kind of audience and was canceled by 1957. This is Gertrude Berg. And Gertrude Berg is sitting in front of some of the 20,000 radio and TV scripts that she did. Gertrude Berg was a powerhouse. She was a producer. She was the writer. She was the star of her show, The Goldbergs, which was extremely successful on radio and made the jump to TV. She's been compared to Oprah Winfrey, and that's not a fair comparison. Oprah was an actress. That's what she did. Gertrude Berg is not only a performer, but she was a creator. Now, she started up in the Catskills. She started in the Borscht Belt. Gertrude Berg was born Tilly Elderstein in New York City in 1898, Lower East Side. And she never forgot her Lower East Side roots in terms of what she did with the Goldbergs. She used to go down there and check out what was going on in the neighborhood, and that would transform into a radio show or TV show. Now, Tilly's father, Jake Edelstein, ran a resort in the Catskill Mountains, and young Tilly, she was about 14 years old, worked there, and you could say she might have been a tumbler because she created and performed skits to amuse the guests' children. Tumbler before Jerry Lewis or Mel Brooks. You're talking about 1912 or so. Of course, this is the Catskills, Dirty Dancing and all that, and Catskill singles weekends and all that, right? Anyway, she meets an older English gentleman, Louis Berg, one summer at the resort. He wooed her, and when she turned 18 in 1916, they get married. And they moved to New Orleans. That's the last we should ever hear of Tilly Elderstein, performer. But her husband, Louis Berg, was an engineer on a sugar plantation, but the sugar plantation burns down. And she decides, hey, let's go back. Let's go back to New York, Louis. How about that? And Louis said, okay, we'll go back. So they return to New York City, and she's going to try her hand at writing and acting full time. And she would change her name to Gertrude Berg, taking her husband's last name. Okay, that's okay. Tilly, I don't know how many big stars were ever named Tilly. In fact, I can't think of any unless you can. She begins writing radio scripts about a fictional family, the Goldbergs. a Jewish family trying to assimilate into America. I don't know how fictional that was because she used to go down to the Lower East Side, and that's where my background is from, the Lower East Side, so I know all about the Lower East Side. And she picks the Goldbergs. It's a combination of her mother's maiden name, which was Gold, and of course her husband's last name. The Goldbergs premiered on radio in 1929, and Gertrude wasn't going to do this Molly role. She was looking for somebody else to do Molly. But no other actress was found. She was so good that when she was sick for a week, the public sent in mass amounts of fan mail saying, "Where's Molly? Where's Molly?" Well, there's Molly, or Gertrude Berg in front of an NBC microphone, reading off a script that she wrote. In 1936, she signed a 5-year, $1 million contract with the sponsor, Procter & Gamble. By the end of the decade, she was making a reported $7,500 a week to produce, write, and star in her own radio series. Now, that $1 million contract today would probably be worth somewhere between $20 and $25 million, which means that in today's dollars, she would be making $4 or $5 million a year. Not quite as lucrative as the big stars of shows, but still really impressive in 1936. During the height of her radio program, she was polled as the second most respected woman in America after Eleanor Roosevelt. She wrote and performed an original sketch for W2XBS. That was the experimental TV station in New York for RCA/NBC in 1940. It was successful. And then she thought, well, maybe I should do a stage version of the Goldbergs. Yeah, I'm going to test it out for visual appeal, i.e. television eventually. World War II comes about, Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, and everything's put on hiatus. She resumes, although you could do a radio show during the war. Television was extremely limited. Anyway, several years go by, and in 1948, she finally writes the play to get on Broadway. It's called Molly and Me. Now, the play only lasted 156 performances, which is a little less than 20 weeks. But it was on long enough to convince that Gertrude Berg that it was time to move to television. And she does, with Bill Paley's CBS, January 1949, to significant fanfare and critical acclaim. It works. It makes the jump from radio to TV. Lots of shows, lots of producers tried it. Many of them failed, including Jack Benny. Although Benny did have a run on TV. The TV show was not as good as the radio show. This was as good as the radio show. Gertrude Berg was lead writer, star, and producer, and the Goldbergs climbed in popularity. In 1950, Gertrude Berg won the first Best Actress Emmy Award in history, and the Goldbergs was nominated for the Best Kinescope Show. Now, for those who don't know what kinescope is, it's really simple. You took a camera, aimed it at the TV, you filmed it, and then cycled it out. If you see the old Ed Sullivan shows on PBS, they're very dark, faces are elongated, doesn't really look all that good, but you know, it's a record of what was going on in those days for the kinescopes that survived. A lot of the kinescopes were destroyed because it had silver in it, and that was more valuable than the kinescope. But anyway, like I said, she was a powerhouse. She had a clothing line for housewives. She published a cookbook. She wrote an advice column called Mama Talks. The television show was made into a movie called Molly by Paramount Pictures. Berg was on the set. She was in the editing room. She was the screenwriter. She was the producer. Yeah, what goes up must come down. And unfortunately, it comes to a crashing halt for Gertrude Berg through no fault of her own. See, it was The Blacklist, starring in 1946 with a Hollywood Reporter with Billy Wilkerson outing 10 guys who allegedly were communists, and House on Un-American Activities would go into full action with Dalton Trumbo and Howard Koch and the others who were outed by Billy Wilkerson. And they were going right after Hollywood. House on Un-American Activities, published Red Channels. The report of communist influence in radio and television. Gertrude's co-star was Philip Loeb, and he was an active union organizer among actors and was listed. And this was a big problem because Gertrude Berg was extremely loyal to Philip Loeb. Red Channels, the report of communist influence in radio and television. Sponsors pulled their support for this show. Gertrude was faced with a dilemma. Find new sponsorship or fire Loeb, and she had great stage chemistry with him, and they were friends. She appealed to the sponsors saying, hey, don't take us off. What's the big deal? He's a union organizer. Don't take us off. She goes to CBS. Oh, CBS, which had employees taking loyalty oaths to the U.S. in 1950. She goes to them and can't help you. She would go to Cardinal Spellman of New York, who told her, okay, I'll help you, but you got to do one thing for me. You got to convert from Judaism to Catholicism. Well, that was a deal breaker. That wasn't going to happen. CBS and the sponsor General Foods, which among other products back in those days had Jell-O, canceled the Goldbergs in 1951. Show was put on hold for 2 years. Found its feet, casting first Harold Stone for 1 year, NBC 1953, and then Robert Harris as replacements for Loeb. It never worked. And also, the sponsors had forgotten about Gertrude Berg. They had totally forgotten about her and her big contribution in radio and in TV. You're hanging around this communist guy, we don't want you. Viewers also, hey, it's Joe McCarthy, McCarthyism in those days. Viewers were scarce. NBC canceled the show. Dumont picks up the show, but they can't afford the show. Also, the viewers weren't there, and Dumont didn't have much of a TV affiliation. The Goldbergs' time had passed. McCarthyism and blacklisting had won. Gertrude Berg was also blacklisted as a communist supporter through her association with Loeb. Loeb meets a terrible, terrible end. If you ever saw the movie The Front with Woody Allen and Zero Mostel, the Mostel character is based on Philip Loeb. That movie should have been great, and yet it plotted. It just didn't get anywhere. But anyway, here's Philip Loeb. Philip Loeb, by 1955, even though Gertrude Berg is sending him some money, he can't find any work. And he's got a schizophrenic son, and he commits suicide. Berg was left to deal with her ruined career. Loeb checked himself into the Taft Hotel in Midtown Manhattan under a false name, took a fatal dose of sleeping pills, and that was the end. And Zero Mostel wrote extensively about that and about the rats, as he called them, that turned in these guys to the House on Un-American Activities. And Zero Mostel himself was blackballed. I hope there are no children here, because that is Betty White. Betty White, not photogenic, but good enough to be the Nine of Hearts. Betty White was a struggling young performer back in around the start of World War II, and needed some money. And so she goes to a photographer. He takes these pictures of her, and she ends up on the Nine of Hearts. Remember those card decks with the naked women on there? Well, she was one of them. Betty White, not photogenic. After World War II, she makes the rounds to movie studios looking for work, but she was always turned down because she was not photogenic. Which is kind of odd because she had a 7-decade career in TV, right? So she goes to radio looking for work, and she does get jobs because being photogenic doesn't matter. Her first radio jobs, including reading commercials, playing bit parts, sometimes even doing crowd noises. She made about $5 a show. She would do just about anything, like singing on a show for no pay or making an appearance on a local game show. I remember back, this is the early days of TV, 1948, 1949. TV was new, and they needed bodies. They needed bodies, and they needed content. They needed content probably more than they needed bodies. She would eventually do, in the 1950s, a show called Life with Elizabeth, which she was part owner. Gertrude Berg, she owned her show. Betty White, she owned her show. You'll see a pattern emerging here in a minute. Betty White was the most prolific female of the 1950s era television. Oh, she was constantly attacked by newspaper critics. Open war declared on her because she had a safe, exuberant demeanor. And she was said to represent everything wrong with the medium, TV. Oh, during the first decade, she was dismissed as too perky, too saccharine, even vacant. She had the last laugh, of course, sitting there with an Emmy Award. She gets her first real TV gig in 1949. It's a show called Hollywood on Television. The disc jockey, Al Jarvis, saw me on Grab Your Phone, and he asked me, "Would you like to be my girl Friday?" I'm starting a television show. It turned out I was be his girl Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. He was going to be on for 5 hours a day. That's how he did his radio show, and he wanted to do the same thing, but on TV. He said he'd pay me $50 a week. $50 a week. I was in heaven. The name of the show? Hollywood on Television. We played records, and in between the records, we talk a little. But while the record was on, the audience would see us moving around and talking to each other. After the first week, they called in, they said, "It's driving us crazy. We need to know what you're saying." So they scrubbed the records throughout the turntables, and we would ad-lib for 5 hours. And can you imagine being stuck with somebody else 5 days a week, and your whole job is to talk to one another 5 days a week for 5 hours? But it works. It works. Well, there was only one other station on at the time in Los Angeles, so it was either us or the test pattern during the day. The show was so successful that after 3 weeks, they extended it to another show on Saturday and stretched it from 5 hours a day to 5.5 hours a day. We were on 33 hours a week, ad lib. Anything that came into their minds, they talked about and talked about and talked about. It seemed to me that would be kind of boring. But there is a talent if you could go on talking and talking and talking about anything for 33 hours a week. Hollywood on Television, and there's the non-photogenic Betty White with her big smile back in the 1950s. Jarvis left the show in 1951. He was talked out. Betty wasn't. The film star Eddie Albert took his place, co-hosted with White for 6 months, till he couldn't deal with doing 33.5 hours of live ad-lib TV per week. He's gone. It took its toll. He resigns. And then she takes over the show. She's talking to herself for 33 hours a week. And then the producers decided, you know what? We got to change this a little bit. After a period of White talking directly into the camera lens for hours at a stretch, the show began accepting guests to interact with her, as well as gradually incorporating scripts and sketches. One sketch involved Betty White as a housewife named Elizabeth, and it caught on. Turning it into a half-hour sitcom appeared to be the next logical step. The series pianist was a guy by the name of George Tibbles, and he begins writing the sketches. The studio producers, Don Featherson, who ended up doing My Three Sons eventually. Anyway, Featherson, Tibbles, and White form a production company. So she is part owner of the show, Life with Elizabeth, called Bandy Productions, named after Betty White's dog Bandit. Animal activist, right? She would end that 33-hour show and start the half-hour sitcom based on the Elizabeth sketches entitled Life with Elizabeth, and that would run for 2 years in syndication, and there would be 65 episodes. Oh, Geritol. You got to use Geritol for iron poor blood. Just chug it, right? It's snake oil. That's what it was. It was snake oil. But they spent a lot of money pushing Geritol, whether it was quiz shows or game shows or Ted Mack's Amateur Hour. Hey, feel stronger fast. Didn't do anything for you. Don Featherson makes a deal with NBC. 30 minutes, 5 days a week, noontime show. It would be the second program entitled The Betty White Show and her first network exposure, although she had a chance to go on the Today Show. She didn't do it. Once again, it was a mixture of songs, light comedy sketches, and celebrity guests. She would follow the home show hosted by the popular Arlene Francis, and both Betty and Arlene would eventually be employed by Goodson Todman. Arlene on What's My Line, and Betty would freelance To Tell the Truth, Password, and a whole bunch of other shows. The Betty White Show was initially a big success. We were doing so well at noon, kids would come home for lunch, mothers would get their work done, and they could tune in, and our ratings kept going up and up and up. There's a fallacy in what Betty White is talking about, because in the 1950s, and I do a whole series of talks from 1950 to 59, about an hour each for each year, and what you find in the 1950s, there were more women in the workplace than ever before in the United States, ever before. It wasn't just mothers staying at home, vacuuming, scrubbing floors, and cooking. Mothers became teachers and secretaries and nurses, and some of them owned businesses, but those were the three main occupations. Don Featherson theorized why the newcomer, Betty White, had instant appeal. Women like her because she isn't in competition with them. Men like her because she's the kind of girl they'd like their daughters to grow up to be. Betty explained to the Associated Press reporter, Bob Thompson, what viewers could expect. We'll have a nice, easy show. Not one of those real fast slam bang shows that you feel you have to sit there and watch. Women are too busy during the day to do that. They want the kind of show that they can look at between chores around the house. Again, not necessarily true. This was a tweet that Betty White authorized in 2021, about a few months prior to her passing. In 1954, Betty White was criticized after having Arthur Duncan, a black tap dancer, on the show. White said, "I'm sorry, live with it," and she gave Duncan even more airtime. Her show was canceled soon after. Betty White last year, "What can I say? I'm one badass bitch." The Arthur Duncan problem. In the early 1950s, White faced criticism for featuring Arthur Duncan, a black tap dancer and singer, on a few episodes of her variety show, The Betty White Show. Duncan said, "I credit Betty White for really getting me started in show business." White described that all through the South, there was this whole ruckus. They were going to take the show off the air if we didn't get rid of Arthur because he was black. White said she wasn't going to budge. Evidently, through the South, at that point, it was a very, very heavy thing. I said, "I'm sorry, but he stays. Live with it." NBC changed the show's time slots, and the show suffered lower viewership. By the end of 1954, NBC quietly canceled the series. Betty White stuck to her guns, but Jim Crow won in this particular case. Hazel Scott, the darling of Cafe Society in New York, first woman of color ever to host an American television show. And people talk about Beyonce and Jay-Z back today. They have nothing on Hazel Scott. Hazel Scott was the darling of Cafe Society in 1939 in New York City. She captivated audiences with her renditions of classical masterpieces by Chopin, Bach, and Rachmaninoff. Nightly, crowds would gather at Cafe Society, New York's first fully integrated nightclub at the epicenter of jazz and politics, nestled in Greenwich Village, to see her. While she was in high school, she hosted her own show on WOR Radio, which last month celebrated its 100th anniversary, after winning a local competition, WOR New York, 710 on your dial. And she performed gigs at night. She made her Broadway debut in the musical review Sing Out the News. Commercial recordings of her Bach to Boogie album on Signature and Decca labels would break sales records nationwide. And there she is at her piano. Well, that's one piano there, but you notice there are two pianos up there. She was one of the first black entertainers to refuse to play before segregated audiences. In Hollywood, Hazel successfully challenged the studio's treatment of black actors, demanding pay commensurate with her white counterparts and refusing to play the subservient roles in which black actors were commonly cast, who would wear no maid-out uniforms or washerwoman rags, and insisted that her name credit appear the same in all her films. Hazel Scott as herself. And then she marries the future congressman Adam Clayton Powell III. The Trials of Hazel Scott and Her Adam Clayton Powell. The romance. Hazel begins a romantic affair with the Harlem preacher slash politician Adam Clayton Powell Jr. And he's making a bid for the U.S. Congress. He was 12 years older than her. He was married and a reputed womanizer. Powell persuaded her or pursued her unabashedly. At first, she was annoyed. She didn't want his advances, but there was something there. There was something there, and she gets to be interested, and there's some passion. The couple begin seeing each other in secret, and they get married in August of 1945. She's a big star. He's a congressman. Big power couple of their day. Hear and see the Hazel Scott Show on television. On July 3rd, 1950, the jazz pianist, the singer, Hazel Scott, becomes the first African Caribbean, she's born in Trinidad, or African American. She comes up to Harlem when she's 4 years old, or person of color, woman, to host a television show on the Dumont Network. Show comes to an abrupt end September 29th, 1950. She's named in Red Channels, the pamphlet that lists the supposed communist sympathizers in entertainment or outright communists, on June 22nd, 1950. She goes before the House on Un-American Activities Committee in September. She's going to defend herself. Sponsors aren't interested. Dumont drops the show. Her association with the Cafe Society. Well, she was a piano player there. That was a suspected communist hangout, along with her civil rights efforts, and there were civil rights efforts in the movies in the 1940s, made her the target of the House on Un-American Activities Committee. She was neither a member of the Communist Party or a communist sympathizer, and she requested to appear voluntarily before the committee, despite Adam Clayton Powell saying, don't do it, it's going to ruin your career. Her career was ruined. Before there was Kim Kardashian and her two assets, there was Dagmar and her two assets. She was the big star. She preceded Marilyn Monroe. She was the buxom blonde bombshell on TV. Dagmar, Broadway Open House, was the first network late-night comedy show. That was Pat Weaver who came up with that in 1950. Jerry Lester and Maury Amsterdam were the hosts, but Maury left the show, leaving Lester as the sole host. There was an actor on the show, Virginia Ruth Egner of West Virginia. Known professionally as Jenny. She took the name Jenny, and Lewis was her husband's last name. And she's part of the show. The audiences loved her deadpan delivery of punchlines and deliberate misuse of words. In one skit, she appeared as a character by the name of Dagmar, and the name sticks. During World War II, she moved to New York City, found work as a sweater model and a Broadway actress. The sweater model days served her well because of her bosom. She became TV's first blonde sex symbol. As Dagmar, she was instructed to wear a low-cut gown, sit on a stool, play the role of a stereotypical dumb blonde. She wore tight sweaters, displaying her curvy 5'8" figure, and they used to give numbers back in those days. Whether they were accurate or not is another story. Measuring 42, 23, 39. Her dim bulb character was an immediate success, and she got more attention than Lester. Can't figure out why. There's a guy a few years ago in Glen Cove, I was giving a talk, and he starts heavy breathing. And he's about 90 years old. And I'm looking, you okay? Okay. She's the best breather on TV. She could breathe better than anybody else. I guess that's what he was talking about, her breathing. Lewis quickly showed that regardless of appearances, she was quite bright, quick-witted. She appeared in sketches, and Lester would make an occasional joke or two about her hidden talents. In 1952, she briefly hosted her own series called Dagmar's Canteen. Those were military guys who were going to probably be shipped off to Korea, and they would do skits with her on Dagmar's Canteen. That show didn't last long. She did variety and game shows throughout the 1950s. She drifted out of the spotlight after the 1950s, but she was still around in nightclubs. And she's still immortalized to this day. The Dagmar bumpers, the GM vice president of development. Well, I don't think he had Dagmar in mind initially when he designed those two nose cones at the end of the car. Harley Earl, he has these conical bumper guards that would mimic artillery shells, but they were also look like the popular bullet bra of the era. And apparently Dagmar wore a buxom, well, actually, she wore a bullet bra. And the comparisons were inescapable. When they first came out, they were all chrome, but they inflicted so much damage to cars that were rear-ended by them. On later models, GM put black rubber tips on them to minimize the damage, but the rubber tips gave them a look like they had pasties on them. About a month ago, I was out in Glen Cove, speaking in that building behind this 1957 Bel Air. And I stopped at McDonald's because I was thinking about getting an ice cream sundae, and there are the Dagmar bumpers, complete with the black pasty over the Dagmar nose cone. The Bueller Show. 1950 to 53, the first show to prominently feature a black character. Beulah was a radio show, came over the TV, like so many other ideas. And this one stuck for a little bit. Was a black maid serving a white suburban family. Beulah, the queen of the kitchen, dispensed wisdom to the ever-bumbling Henderson family and her friend Oriole. Three actresses played the title role. The first one, Ethel Waters, whom the network replaced. ABC was the network with the Academy Award winner Hattie McDaniel, and then Louise Beavers, who replaced McDaniel when she fell ill. And there are the three Beulahs, Waters, McDaniel, and Beavers. Ethel Waters started out and starred as Beulah in the first year of the show. She quit in 1950. The production would move out to Hollywood. Hattie McDaniel, the star of the Beulah radio show, was cast in the title role summer of 51, but only filmed 6 shows before falling ill. She was quickly replaced by Louise Beavers in late 1951. The Beulah Show came under attack from many critics, including the NAACP, which accused the show of supporting stereotypical depictions of black characters, with Beulah viewed as a stereotypical mammy, similar to Aunt Jemima. You could say the same thing about Amos and Andy, because the NAACP went after that show, which was on CBS. Lucille Ball. Lucille Ball was an actor. She was a comedic performer. She was not a comedian. She was very good in the role as a comedic performer. But again, she wasn't a stand-up comic. She was an actor. In 1950, Lucille Ball was approached by CBS to do a weekly program on television because she was doing so well on the radio show My Favorite Husband. Again, the radio show jumping over. And she's 39 years old, and she jumps at the chance because she was a journeyman performer. That's what she was. She wasn't somebody who was a star. She was a performer. And she had been around, but she really should not have had any major leverage. Hey, do a show. And she jumped at it. But the businesswoman in her says, no. Let's talk about this, because I want Desi Arnaz, a Cuban exile, to play her husband on television, possibly to save their marriage. CBS executives said, no, this won't fly. Jell-O, which was the potential sponsor, said the American public won't accept Desi as the husband of a red-blooded American girl from Jamestown, New York, even though he was the husband of a red-blooded American girl from Jamestown, New York, and had been for 10 years. CBS and Jell-O said, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Let's take Richard Denning off of the radio show and put him on the TV show. She said no. Jell-O, General Foods, said, well, we're out of here. Philip Morris, the cigarette company, replaced Jell-O. Lucy wants to save her marriage. It's working together. And yes, they were married. Lucy told CBS, you have both of us or neither. And eventually CBS said, we really want you. Okay, we'll do it. But we have doubts. He's Cuban. He has a strong Cuban accent. Oh, and Desi and Lucy were an interracial or multi-ethnic couple, and that spelled trouble. Yeah, they were married, and they were indeed married. See, you got to go back to 73 years prior to that, when Rutherford B. Hayes was president of the United States between 1877 and 1881. See, here's the problem. Interracial marriage was illegal in parts of the United States in 1876 and in 1950. America's civil rights movement was stalled since 1875. Desegregation in the South ended with the Hayes-Tilden presidential race in 1876. Rutherford B. Hayes became president after, because the race was really close, and the Republicans and Democrats said, let's cut a deal, and we'll get our guy to concede. Hayes became president after the Democrats cut a deal with the Republicans. Democrats said, get the federal troops out of South Carolina, out of Louisiana, give us states' rights, you could have the Oval Office. And that's exactly what happened. Interracial marriage was illegal in more than a dozen states at that time. 17 in 1950. So Lucy and Desi go on tour to prove that they could, as an interracial couple, sway the crowd to like them. They're doing the Cuban Pete routine there. During the summer of 1950, Lucy and Desi go on tour, performing before live audiences to show CBS and the potential sponsor Desi would be believable as the husband. In early 1951, they produced a film pilot for the series with $5,000 of their own money. And it's a smash hit once it gets on. I asked the question when I'm live doing this or the Lucy talk, and you can throw this in chat if you choose to do so. What made the show work, in my opinion, and in the opinion of others, is that there are two different storylines going on. There's the Lucy and Ricky marriage, and then there's the Lucy and Ethel friendship. And I've asked people, I said, what was more important in the show? What did you like more? And if you want to throw some answers in there, I will answer you. And if you throw it in chat, what they say. But again, there are two things going on here. Ricky wants a wife who's the traditional housewife, and Lucy doesn't want to be the traditional housewife. She wants to go in showbiz. She wants to go in the business, and she has a partner in crime there in Ethel. Lucy, the business side of this, Lucy wanted to film before a live audience. She wanted Carl Fraun to be the cinematographer. That's okay, live audience. He could be the cinematographer, but had to be in New York or Chicago. Couldn't be in Los Angeles. She wanted to be in Los Angeles. New York and Chicago were TV centers in 1951. Lucy was one of the pioneering shows for the use of multiple simultaneously filming cameras in a live studio audience. Actually, that was kind of invented with the Groucho Marx show, You Bet Your Life. It was one of the first TV shows to be shot on 35 millimeter film rather than broadcast live. Like I said, it was Groucho that pioneered that concept. And who would you like to have cut that, whatever Groucho did, into a 28-minute show? Because there was a lot of funny stuff there with him and Fennerman and the guests. Earlier film shows include your Showtime, Stu Irwin Show, The Life of Riley. Jerry Fairbanks developed and was using the multiple camera film production for television in 1950, and You Bet Your Life started the year before. The other thing, Lucy bounced around for a very long time, 22 years before she got that radio gig in 20 years before she got the radio gig, 22 years before she got the TV gig. And Lucy was right. Desi was the perfect foil for Lucy. Lucy knew talents. She bounced around all those years. Desi had good comedic timing and an expressive face, offered the right amount of fluster as the husband Ricky, mispronounced and Latinized words, which added to the comedy. Within 4 months of its debut, I Love Lucy was the #1 show in New York, and the national audience would follow. It was the most popular show. It was a cash cow. It was a cash cow for Lucy and Desi. It was a cash cow for CBS. It was a cash cow for Philip Morris. Oh, CBS is in love with it because they're not even picking up the production costs. Lucy and Desi agreed to pay for the increase in production costs provided they, not CBS, owned the rights to the film. Brilliant business move. No one at the time thought anybody would ever watch a rerun. The deal? Well, Lucy and Desi received ownership rights to I Love Lucy in exchange for a $1,000 a week salary pay cut. The show almost dies after 1 year because Lucy is pregnant. And most people thought she was the first pregnant woman on TV. She wasn't. Lucy and Desi almost end the show in 1951, or rather 52, because they're going to have a second kid. 1952 America. Too racy for a visibly pregnant woman to be on TV. Television had censorship problem. Lucy and Desi were not allowed to say the word pregnant. Jess Oppenheimer, the showrunner, head writer, producer, comes to the rescue. This is at a breakup party for the year. Everybody goes on hiatus for 13 weeks, and Desi and Lucy resume production in August. And he comes to the rescue, looking adoringly at Lucy, she at him, and Desi with that expressive face. He says, Oppenheimer, let's write the pregnancy into this show. Risky. It's real risky. Visibly pregnant woman that never appeared on stage or television before. Big risk. Lucy and Desi and Oppenheimer from the creative end. CBS and the show sponsor, Philip Morris, from their end. Except there was a married pregnant woman that was on TV. Mary Kay Stevens, 1948, Duma, but nobody saw that show. So it was okay to have a pregnant woman on TV, but it wasn't. At least they didn't think it was. Storyline works. CBS allowed Lucy to appear on stage during the pregnancy. And some of the scripts did address the topic. However, the executives, the stuffed shirts, don't go overboard. Don't cause too much of a stir. But they survived. You know, according to Lucy, in early fall, when I was beginning to look pretty big, we did 7 shows concerning my pregnancy. These films were screened by a priest, a minister, and a rabbi for any possibility of a violation of good taste. It was the CBS network that objected to using the word pregnant. They made us say expecting. So a priest, a minister, and a rabbi, they walk into this room. That's because they're going to watch a show. The 3-man religious committee had not protested. Have to be biblical there. What's wrong with pregnant? They were hardly in favor of what we were doing, showing motherhood as a happy, wholesome, normal family event. She also wore pants on TV. Nobody wore pants. No woman wore pants on TV. Everybody walked around with a skirt, except for Lucy. Only one in the 1950s. I don't know, part of the TV code. During the second season, 52-53, she was pregnant, couldn't do an entire 39 episode production, and missed the program here and there. Well, actually, they missed after she gave birth on the show. They went right to the reruns. At that point in TV, you just show the program once, and there was a problem. But Desi and Oppenheimer said, we got all these shows sitting collecting dust on the shelf. Let's throw it on. And they did. Rebroadcasting episodes from the first season, which very few people saw because there weren't very many TV stations around 1951. The FCC froze television station licenses in 48 to see how TV really operated, signals and all that. The thaw came in 52 when these shows were on, 52-53, and people saw the I Love Lucy show, the old shows, for the first time. Hey, it's a new area for TV syndication. You can make money off reruns. With that, Lucy and Desi become TV's first millionaires. Oh, about the pregnancy, Dwight Eisenhower becomes the president of the United States, January 20th, 1953, with Dick Nixon becoming vice president. Please call me Dick. It's my interaction with Nixon in 85, 86. So I called him Dick. He wanted to be called Dick. I said, hello, Dick. Called me, said, hello, Evan. How are you? That was cool. At least I thought it was, even though he was disgraced. Little Ricky and Ike, the episode in which Lucy gives birth to little Ricky, airs about 15 hours before Ike became president at night. Lucy gets 44 million viewers. Pregnancy is not a problem. Ike gets 29 million viewers. This is the thing that could have ended Lucy's career. Registered red in 1936, Lucille Star denies she voted commie, but here's the proof. Affidavit of registration, Miss Lucille D. Ball. I intend to affiliate at the ensuing primary election with the Communist Party. Fighting communism, red channels. Americans don't patronize Reds. You can drive the Reds out of television, radio, and Hollywood. And this track, Red Channels, will tell you how. Why we must drive them out. The Reds have made our screen, radio, and TV Moscow's most effective fifth column in America. The Reds of Hollywood and Broadway have always been the chief financial support of communist propaganda in America. Our own films, made by Red producers, directors, writers, stars, are being used by Moscow and Asia, Africa, and the Balkans, and throughout Europe to create hatred of America. Right now, films are being made to craftily glorify Marxism. Now, I thought that happened in the 30s with Groucho Chico and Harpo, and even Zeppo with Duck Soup or Horse Feathers or Night at the Opera. Well, they're probably talking about Karl Marx. That's what they're talking about. UNESCO, one worldism, and via your TV set, they are being piped into your living room, and they're poisoning the minds of your children under your very eyes. Hey, I know a lot of people who grew up in the 1950s. I don't think they were poisoned, but Red Channel said you could. So remember, if you patronize a film made by Red producers, writers, stars, and studios, you're aiding and abetting communism. Every time you permit Reds to come into your living room via your TV set, you are helping Moscow and the internationalists destroy America. The blacklist involved the practice of denying employment to entertainment industry professionals believed to be or have been communist or sympathizers, not just actors, screenwriters, Dalton Trumbo, directors, musicians, Leonard Bernstein, Pete Seeger, and other American entertainment professionals barred from work by the studios, like Burt Kelton, the original Alice Cramden on the Honeymooner sketches on Dumont, Cavalcade of Stars. She's kicked off the show. Gleason and the producers say, oh, she had a heart problem. Gleason brought her back in the mid-1960s in the Miami version of his show, which featured the Honeymooners sketches. Lee Grant, an actress, she's blacklisted because she marries a guy by the name of Arnie Manoff, who's a screenwriter and a communist. She marries him, and the House on Un-American Activities want to know a little bit more about their marriage. She was asked to testify against Manoff. She refused. When I was 24, I was blacklisted. When I was 36, I got off the blacklist. Lee Grant. McCarthyism and blackballing. September 4th, 1953, Lucy gives voluntary testimony to an investigator for the House on Un-American Activities. It was our grandfather, Fred Hudd. He just wanted it to. And I just recall, and we just did something to please him. I didn't intend to vote that way, as I recall. J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, big fan of Lucy. That might have saved Lucy from being blacklisted. Oh, she swore to the House committee she never knowingly aided the Communist Party, aside from placating her grandfather's many requests for room in the garage to organize with his friends. In her autobiography, she thought of herself as a strong conservative with a Puritan streak, proclaimed, I'm the most conservative member of my family. It's for her grandfather, a progressive and a free thinker. She registered as a communist. So here is the news conference. Desi had been thrown out of Cuba in 1933 because his family was on the wrong side of the sergeant's revolt, thrown out of the country by Batista. They ended up, Ornez's father was a politician, and they had ties to a rum company. They ended up in Miami. He's in exile. And he's probably thinking about, what's going on here 20 years later? But before the filming of episode 68 of I Love Lucy, entitled The Girls Go Into Business, he's doing the studio warm-up, and he addresses the issue because they thought Lucy was going to be booed as soon as she walked out, and he reuses the line in Heather Hopper's gossip column. The only thing read about Lucy is her hair, and even that's not legitimate. See? It's not legitimate. Her hair changed in 1943 for the movie To Barry Was a Lady by MGM, and there she is as a redhead. Oh, and there's even more. The Confidential magazine, 1955, Does Desi Really Love Lucy? 1955, Desi Arnaz is cheating on his wife, Lucille Ball, according to Confidential. I knew Desi was inviting me for more than a drink, said the Babe. It was a story from the 1940s when Arnaz and Ball were separated. The Babe, quoted, was a prostitute on Confidential's payroll. It was still both safe and lucrative to run the story, Does Desi Love Lucy? Tough gig for Lucy. She caught colds, had crying spells, broke 2 fingers, sprained her ankle 3 times, pulled a tendon, sweated off 19 pounds, came down with a virus, went on hiatus while she recovered at the beach, fainted on stage another time. The production company sets up an oxygen tank for her in the wings, and guess what? She faints again. By 1956, Lucy and Desi are done. They sell the show to CBS for $5 million. With that money, Desi and Lucy purchased the RKO studio lot to film all kind of other shows, including the Andy Griffith Show, Mission Impossible, Hogan's Heroes, Batman, Star Trek, and others. Meanwhile, the people who've told me about why the I Love Lucy show worked for them wasn't the interaction between Lucy and Desi, but the interaction between Lucy and her best friend, Ethel. Oh, My Favorite Husband, the show that launched Lucy into TV. Well, it's picked up by CBS in 1953. They filmed the show the first 2 years, and then Desi Lou gets it the last year it's on. Lucy makes money off the show that made her famous. And there would be an occasional show afterwards, 5 of them. Dinah Shore, See the USA, Drive a Chevrolet, 1951. She's on the Ed Wynn Show and then the Bob Hope Show. And those appearances lead her to her own 15-minute weekly show twice a week called The Dinah Shore Show. 1956, Chevrolet sponsors a Dinah Shore, 2 Dinah Shore 1-hour specials. They're successful. The Dinah Shore Chevy Show is on between 56 and 61. Now, I wasn't a big fan of the Donna Reed Show, but I started reading about this, and I realized that Donna Reed was more Gertrude Berg than she was Lucille Ball. She wrote and produced some of the episodes. The 1950s women depicted stay-at-home mothers, which I talked about before. They're there to cook and clean. The father of the house makes a decision, but the character, Donna Stone, she's going to pursue her own career. And she's going to be an equal in the marriage. And she assumes the role of disciplinarian and moral teacher to her children. The show runs 8 years, 58 to 66. Paul Peterson was a heartthrob, if you remember. As we get to the end here, Erna Phillips. Nobody has heard of Erna Phillips, but you probably saw some of her products. She was a soap opera writer on radio and TV. She was the queen of soaps, and she introduced techniques such as the organ bridge to give a smooth flow between scenes. I knew Eddie Layton. He was the CBS organist. And I said to Eddie one day, I said, what do you like doing most about soap operas? He said, the villain, of course. He said, those were my favorite. And also the cliffhanger ending to each episode. And she still has a product on. 89 years after she started, Days of Our Lives is on. Among the things that she did, Today's Children, Guiding Light, Road of Life, Women in White, first hospital soap opera, As the World Turns, Another World, Love is a Many Splendid Thing, and she created in 1965 with Alan Chase and Ted Corday, Days of Our Lives, still on. Faye Emerson was David Letterman and Johnny Carson and Steve Allen and Jimmy Kimmel and all the rest of them before they were them. The Faye Emerson Show began on CBS October 24th, 1949, local East Coast markets. It jumps to the network in March of 1950. In 1950, she also hosted a similar show on NBC called 15 with Faye. That lasted 6 months, then she committed full-time to the CBS show. She was the first late-night talk show host. She preceded Jerry Lester and Maury Amsterdam and Dagmar, although she wasn't the host. Steve Allen, Jack Parr, all of them. She preceded them. 1950, we got to remember the time frame. China had just gone communist, so there would be shows about relations with China. The war in Korea would start in 1950. Nuclear arms. Equality for women with guests such as Frank Sinatra and Frank Lloyd Wright, Tennessee Williams, and Edith Piaf. And the next night, hey, it might be clowns. There have to be clowns. Send in the clowns. That is Martha Roundtree, and she invented Meet the Press. There with Senator Esther Kiefauer, WNBW, Channel 4 in Washington. Martha Roundtree, along with being the program's co-creator on TV, producer, and chief booker, also acted as the show's sole host and moderator. She created Meet the Press on Radio in 1945, Mutual Radio. I worked there at Mutual. She would join forces with Lawrence Spivak, then the publisher and editor of the American Mercury magazine show. Meet the Press starts on Mutual Radio October 5th, 1945. On TV, November 6, 1947. She would leave Meet the Press in 1953 because she had big arguments with Lawrence Spivak. She jumped over the Dumont. Pauline Frederick, she was a correspondent for ABC at the Democratic National Convention in 1948. I got in the door because in those days, the men didn't know any more about television than the women. I went to Elizabeth Arden to learn about makeup and Bonwood Teller to learn about how to dress, and I always got plenty of advice on how I should look. Management wanted me in navy colors with austere necklines. They insisted I lighten my dark brown hair. They told me to wear contact lenses instead of glasses, and they continually had my hair teased because they said I was too flat-headed. The legacy. Betty White just passed away. Gertrude Berg survived the blacklist, but never achieved the popularity she once enjoyed. She continued in showbiz. She won the Best Actress Tony in 1959 for her performance opposite Cedric Hartwick in The Majority of One on Broadway. She's totally forgotten today by young people. Betty White's career, 7 decades. Hazel Scott, also forgotten, but was she forgotten? For her role as the first person of color to host a TV show. At the 2019 Grammy Awards, Alicia Keys paid tribute to her. I've been thinking so much about the people and the music that have inspired. I want to give a shout out to Hazel Scott because I always wanted to play 2 pianos. Hazel Scott fled to France in the 1950s to pursue a career. She returned to the U.S. in the late 1960s. Dagmar hung around TV as a game show guest host and a talk show host or a talk show guest in the 1950s and 60s. She would perform in Las Vegas in summer stock. She retired and moved back to West Virginia. Lucille Ball, still popular today. 2 biopics have been released about her. Faye Emerson, retired from showbiz, 1963, went on to live in Europe. Dinah Shore had a long career into the 1980s. Donna Reed's show was groundbreaking. Erna Phillips' influence on soap operas continues today. Mary Kay Stearns disappeared from TV in 1952. Following the Mary Kay and Johnny show, she did some other appearances. Arlene Francis in 1961 went to radio, and she was there for almost 3 decades. She was a regular panelist on What's My Line on CBS and in syndication. Martha Roundtree's Meet the Press is the longest running show on American TV. She was the first and only female moderator in the show's history, followed by Lawrence Spivak and Tim Russert and David Gregory and now Chuck Todd. Pauline Frederick moderated a 1976 presidential debate. And we leave with Gertrude Berg, who, she started in radio 93 years ago. And it amazes me just how talented Gertrude Berg was. And she got her start in the Borscht Belt at a hotel. Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you as an audience. And the floor is all yours now. Whatever you want to say, go ahead. Whether it's a comment or a question, feel free.
I'm just sending everybody a message to unmute. Let's do that.
Any questions or comments? Nobody? Nobody has anything to say?
That was a lot of information.
Well, it's International Women's Month, right? And those were the pioneers.
Have you seen the Lucy and Desi movie?
I've seen parts of it. Thank you, Denise and Tina. Thank you. All those women were great. You know, one of the things I talked about in the women, you see a pattern, whether it was Gertrude Berg, Lucy, or Donna Reed, they own the shows. but also the communist influence and how Gertrude Berg was stopped and Lucy was almost stopped and Hazel Scott was certainly stopped. And it's interesting that there were, to me, it seemed that there were more women stopped in their tracks on TV because of the Red Scare than men back in the day. Of course, Lucy, she was, cash cow. And it would have been very, very, very hard to get rid of her and replace that money on CBS or with Philip Morris.
Well, I was born the year that TV was invented, so you can think back to when we had
1939?
well, 1949 was when we had our first television.
39 is when
And
TV
it was, we had this little magnifying glass in front of the television so that we could all watch. And I remember a lot of these programs that you're talking about, but I really never knew about the history of the women. I was like 5 years old, 6 years old when I was watching Mrs. Goldberg or the Jackie Gleason show or what. But a lot of these shows are still on, get them on some channels on,
what survived.
Yeah, that they've all survived, a lot of them, more than shows that we have today. So there's been longevity with them.
Yeah, the problem with Dumont, a lot of those shows were dumped into the East River by Channel 5 and Metro Media in New York. There aren't too many of the Dumont shows around, and some of them are around, but it's kind of remarkable how, Pauline Frederick had the quote, "The men didn't know what they were doing either."
But everybody remembers Lucille Ball stomping on the grapes.
Yes.
And they all remember her eating the candy because she couldn't keep up with the conveyor belt. So there were lasting memories.
And the whatever that was called.
Veg meat or
Those
something.
are the three.
But everybody, it has lasting memories. They're good memories.
Yep. Thank you, Carl. Hopefully we'll see you in person. Carl lives near me. And I'm glad you came. And Carl I'll let you know when I'm in person, when I finally
Okay, very, very good. Thanks.
Thanks. Anybody else? Well, Mary, thank you so much for inviting me. I hope that the YouTube people out there have enjoyed it as well. And I'm sure it'll be up in YouTube for a while. So those people who will catch it at another time, I hope you enjoy it. My name is Evan Weiner. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. Anybody else have any questions or comments or criticisms before I go?
No, thank you very much. It was very interesting.
That Denise?
Yes, learned a lot of things I didn't know.
Great job.
Well, there's the early days of TV. It's kind of interesting. In many ways, there was a lot more talent out there than today. And today you got 53 different network streaming services and all of that stuff. But
Oh, yeah.
but these people who worked back in those days all came from radio. And the radio content was massive, absolutely massive, because you had to churn that stuff out. And there was NBC and there was CBS and there was Mutual Radio. I mean, my favorite story is Superman and why Superman was allergic to kryptonite. It was on radio. Bud Collyer, who was playing Superman and Clark Kent, he basically wanted a vacation, so they had to figure out what to do. And they said, "Oh, we just need somebody to go." So they came up with this whole idea that because he came from the planet Krypton, and there were poisonous gases that were blocked out by the kryptonite atmosphere, but it wasn't the same on Earth. And if he got near kryptonite, he wouldn't be the Man of Steel anymore. And so it took 4 years for the comic strip to catch up to the radio show, but it had a lot of content, an awful lot of content. And some of that went to TV, most of it unsuccessful. Most of it. I Love Lucy came out of her favorite husband, same writers. but they kind of recast it to where she's married to Desi, but same concept. They had best friends as neighbors, and they were all kind of screwball, harebrained ideas that the Lucy character had on radio.
Great.
The only suggestion I would have, and I don't know if it's possible, it would have been nice to see some clips from their shows
Yes, but
as you were talking about them. I don't know if there are royalty things
yeah,
involved.
there are royalty things involved. I
That
can
would have
tell you that. I can tell you that because I speak on cruise ships, and the cruise ships tell us not to put film up there. Disney is the worst. Disney actually goes looking through YouTube to find out who's violating their stuff.
We had someone play a few chords on an instrument of a song, and it was like almost immediate, the response, like you're presenter.
Wow.
So we took that down. So yeah, there are people that it's their job to stay on top of it, and they do their job well, apparently.
Yeah. So yeah, Disney is the worst. Johnny Carson Productions is really, really bad too. When you put up, because I know a guy by the name of Wayne Cotter, who is a comedian who played up back in the day up in the Catskills, and he had a letter basically saying from Johnny Carson, use my clips whenever you wanted. They wanted to pull it down off his website, and he produced the letter, and then okay, if Johnny said that, then that's fine. But that's a major problem. They go after you. Now it's not a major problem if you're in if you're not on YouTube, if you're not streaming. It's fine in a place that it's not going anywhere. But YouTube, Facebook, it's a problem. The cruise ships have blanket agreements with people, so depending on who you know and you let them know, then you could slip a clip in there, but you could claim fair use and all that other stuff. But Major League Baseball used to charge $90 a second for a clip. So so it is a problem if you're caught.
Evan, I have a question.
Sure. Hi, Sheila.
I remember Mama on around the same time as the Goldbergs.
Yeah.
Because I always like that. When I think of my childhood, I remember Mama.
That was about a Norwegian family.
What?
That was about a Norwegian family.
Right. Yes.
TV back in the early days of TV, there were a lot of ethnic shows, and they all went away during the Red Scare, all of them.
Mm.
So, which is kind of odd, but they did.
And nothing was on in the middle of the night. Like,
No, test pattern. It's not true. They had the test pattern on.
oh, that's right. Yeah. That's
The test pattern. The Indian head test pattern. There was a guy who once tried to explain it to me. He was a retired TV engineer. I was doing a talk in Teaneck, New Jersey. I put the test pattern up. And it was the early days of TV. Not only did he tell me about the test pattern, but he told me about microwave internet hookups with AT&T and coaxial cable. And I was trying to be really nice to him. The guy was in his 90s and he didn't miss a beat. I said, hey, this is my problem. I'm talent. I'm the last to know and the first to go. And he looked at me and he said, you've been in radio and TV, haven't you? But I'm the last to know and the first to go. He said, yeah. I don't remember the actress who played it, but you can look it up. So, and all. So, anyway, so thank you. And thank you, Mary, for inviting me. And hopefully we'll see you again down the line, or maybe in Florida even, right? And thank you, Tina. So have a good night. Anybody have anything else before I wrap it up? And my wife decides, hey, your food's getting cold. When should I put in the microwave?
Thank you, Evan. That was great. And if you know anybody that would enjoy this program, just send them to our website and scroll down to the bottom, and they can go to our YouTube page and connect. So and see it. So
So thank you, Mary, and thank you for attending, and have a good evening. My name is Evan Weiner. Have a good night. Bye-bye,
Enjoy-
everybody.
Enjoy your
Thanks,
dinner.
thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.